Good afternoon, everyone. This is Andrew Pompey with the Hanover County Planning Department. I'll go ahead and get started on today's webinar about round three of our topical focus areas as part of the comprehensive plan update. So to give you all an overview of what we'll be hearing this afternoon, we'll have a presentation about the comprehensive plan, the update process to date. We'll give an overview of some of the previous topics discussed, but primarily focus on the top three topics for this round of meetings, which are environment, community facilities, and transportation. After the presentation, we'll have some time for questions and answers. All of the concepts and documents that we're discussing today are on the Envision Hanover website. If you go to envisionhanover.com, on the top, there's a tab that says Project Resources, and all the draft topics associated with today's meeting, as well as the previous meetings, are posted online if you want to get more detail and take a deeper dive as to what the recommendations are. So what is the comprehensive plan? Every locality in Virginia is required to have a comprehensive plan, which serves as a high-level guide regarding growth, development, and the provision of public infrastructure. That plan must be reviewed every 5 years. So the current plan here in Hanover County was adopted in February 2018, so we're right at that 5-year mark. The comprehensive plan is a guide and recommendations for the Planning Commission and Board of Supervisors in particular, and they address a wide variety of topics from land use to economic development, housing, and that kind of thing. There's 2 or 3 different topic areas that are going to be a new chapter as part of this comprehensive plan update. Housing. In the current plan, housing does not have a dedicated chapter, so that's a new chapter. Rural, that's a new chapter. It'll be solely focused on rural issues and rural character. And then resiliency is a new component of the environment chapter. One major component of this comprehensive plan and all the comprehensive plans since 1982 is the concept of the suburban service area, or the SSA. That's the county's designated growth area. And you can see it's evolved over the years, but it's been pretty consistent since 2007. And as part of this update, we're to keep the comprehensive plan suburban service area the same extent. It makes up 22% of the county's total area, but is intended to accommodate 70% of the growth. So this is an important concept as we consider land use, community facilities, and that kind of thing. And you can see again on that map how it's evolved over time, but it's been primarily along the 95 to 95 corridor areas in the center and southern parts of the county. So the comprehensive plan update process, which we're calling Envision Hanover, began in October of 2021. And there have been a variety of different events and ways where we've been trying to get feedback from the public as to what their vision is for the future. Most of 2022 was spent getting feedback on the community strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and that kind of thing. So the first set of meetings started in January 2022. And we spent most of 2023 looking at different focus areas included within the plan. This is the third round of 3 rounds where we looked at those different focus areas. So we've had a variety of in-person meetings, webinars, online surveys. The project team has been working to raise awareness of this planning effort by having a booth at different events. And we've also been working with different committees that the county already has, such as the Historical Commission, to get more expert feedback on the specific topic areas. There's also videos posted online if you want to take a deeper dive in different topic areas. Those are on the county's YouTube page, as well as the Envision Hanover website, and they focus on different topic areas. Through all that public feedback, we heard a lot of different ideas. The first round, for example, of feedback, we received over 4,000 comments. We were able to identify some common themes in that first round that we've used throughout the planning process as we continue to develop recommendations and more details regarding the different topic areas. In terms of community values, preserving rural character found in much of the county was one thing we heard a lot of. Related to that, there's a strong desire to manage growth to make sure it's located in appropriate areas. There's also interest in providing quality and diverse housing options at different locations as appropriate. In terms of community infrastructure and services, which we're talking about today, they wanted to maintain and enhance the transportation network. And not only did the public want to maintain and enhance our roadway network, but they also wanted to provide more opportunities for walking and biking, maintaining good schools, providing more parks, particularly within our suburban areas, and expanding broadband access. There's a lot of focus related to that rural character theme on community character. How does the community look and develop over time? People wanted to incorporate that rural character not only in the rural areas, but in the suburban areas as well, provide transitions between different types of uses and between suburban and rural areas, protect and enhance our rural villages and crossroads, create well-planned neighborhoods, and accommodate high-quality businesses at appropriate locations, primarily near interstates and major corridors. So as I mentioned, we're getting thousands of different comments. We were able to identify those common themes, but there are some deviations in what we're hearing from different stakeholders. So we're getting feedback from residents, landowners, businesses, and different interest groups. And we're trying to work with the Planning Commission and the Board of Supervisors to take that feedback we're receiving and come up with recommendations that balance all those different interests. As I mentioned, much of 2023 has been spent getting feedback and developing ideas on the different topic areas that are specifically included in the plan. So we had our first round of focus area meetings in January and February. We looked at land use, economic development, and historic resources. In April, May, we had our second round that looked at active living, which is primarily pedestrian and bicycle, infrastructure and mobility, housing and rural. And we also, during that time period, circled back to the round one topic areas and presented any changes we made based on the feedback we heard. And now as part of round three, we're looking primarily, again, at community facilities and utilities, environment resiliency, and transportation. Resiliency is a new component of the comprehensive plan. If you didn't participate, or even if you did participate in the earlier rounds, we have summaries of the feedback we received on the Envision Hanover website on project resources. And you can also learn about the different public engagement events at that same page. So now I'll just go back and give a high-level overview of the concepts presented at the previous rounds. We're not going to go into a lot of detail because, again, those had been presented earlier this year, but we want to give an overview for those of you that haven't been involved in the process to understand some of the different recommendations and concepts that are being considered right now. So again, round one, which was in the first part of the year, we had some public meetings at different libraries in January and February, looked at land use, economic development, and historic resources. Here are some of the high-level concepts that were presented and we got some feedback on, as well as made some revisions to. The suburban service area, which is that development area I showed in the previous slide, will be retained as is. It will not expand or contract. It will continue to make up 22% of the county's total area. One new concept we heard a lot during the public engagement is they wanted to have transitions between that suburban area and the rural areas so that there was a gradual decrease in density as you move farther out from the core of the suburban service area. So on the general land use plan, there are a new designation called suburban transitional residential that recommends densities of up to 1.5 units per acre on the edge of most parts of the suburban service area. In addition to that new land use designation, there's some more description and recommendations regarding the design of the different land use designations. So on the general land use plan, there are different land use designations that show where different types of uses may be appropriate, different types of commercial, residential, and industrial uses. In the previous plan, there's not a lot of detail regarding how those different types of development and uses should be designed, such as the layout, the architecture, the buffering, the landscaping, those sorts of things. Based on the feedback we received at the public meetings, as well as a visual preference survey that was done online in 2022, we developed some more detailed recommendations on how development should look and feel. There's no change in the targeted distribution of residential growth. There's a target of having 70% of new residential growth in the suburban service area so that our rural areas remain rural and there's not as much development in those areas. And then based on our growth trends, it's a forecast that we'll have a 1% growth rate over the next 20 years. That's how we've been growing. That's not something we're trying to reach our target, but as we consider different community facilities and needs related to that, we're considering a 1% growth rate. So the draft maps, again, that general land use plan shows where different types of uses are recommended. Those were originally presented in January. There were some changes based on public feedback that were presented in April, and those are online. Not only is there a map online showing the changes, but there's also a listing that describes the significant changes and the rationale behind them. In addition, different signs were posted in these areas where significant change was proposed. Those went out in mid-May and we'll be taking those down next week, but you might have seen those signs around. And we also sent a letter to impacted property owners. History and culture. So some of the new concepts in this particular chapter, which focuses on our historic resources, there's some more design guidance for our historic districts, especially our National Register districts, which include Brown Grove Rural Historic District, Hanover County Courthouse, and Montpelier. Again, that guidance talks about as new development occurs in that area, how it should look and feel and relate to the historic buildings and the character of the overall community. For development sites, there's a little bit more guidance regarding what is expected regarding the preservation of historic structures, archaeological sites, historic cemeteries, and battlefield features. Again, there's not a lot of guidance in the current plan about how development should consider these different features if they're incorporated into the design of those developments. So that's some guidance the Historical Commission, the Planning Commission, and the Board of Supervisors can use, as well as citizens, as we evaluate different development proposals and how they relate to those particular resources if they're present. Economic vitality, some changes since the 2017 plan. Since 2010, the county has identified economic development zones, and those are areas where economic development is targeted. However, in the previous plans, all economic development zones are treated the same. So we developed different categories to reflect the different character and needs of these areas. And there's a map on the project website that shows the different economic development zones. They're primarily located along the I-295 and 95 corridors. Some sites are really greenfield sites where there's not a lot of existing development, but the potential for economic development. Some sites, such as the Industrial Air Park, for example, are established economic development areas where there's a lot of different businesses already there. How can we continue to support those businesses? And then there's also renewal areas such as Old Mechanicsville Village. Those are important parts of the county where there's already some businesses, but there could be some continued or new investment in those areas to make them even more attractive for businesses and improve aesthetics and that kind of thing. There's also different objectives that talk about how we can retain our existing businesses, attract new ones, promote tourism. There's a lot of comment and focus during that particular round of public engagement where people wanted to promote heritage tourism in the county, supporting agribusinesses, increasing availability of broadband, and supporting workforce development. So again, that was round one that originally was introduced in January and February of this year. Later on in the year, April and early May, we had the round two meetings where there was discussion on rural, what does rural mean, housing, and active living, which is pedestrian and bicycle mobility. The rural chapter would be a new chapter in the comprehensive plan. Of course, the previous comprehensive plans looked at rural characteristics and rural features of the county, but since it's such an important part of the county, it's something a lot of people brought up during public engagement. We thought it was best to have that this topic have its own chapter. Again, 78% of the county is outside the suburban service areas and tend to remain rural. We throw around the word rural a lot, and one thing we tried to work with as part of the visioning portion of this project in early 2022 is develop a definition of what rural means. So we asked citizens, what are the different characteristics of rural? What does rural mean to you? And we've developed a listing of what those rural characteristics are, and that full listing's in the draft chapter. Some of the key strategies are, of course, land preservation. How do we preserve? What techniques do we use to preserve rural lands? What tools do we give rural property owners to make sure their lands remain rural? There are strategies for how to address rural residential development outside the suburban service area, for example, providing buffers and that kind of thing to make sure that any new development that does occur, even though it's very low density, doesn't negatively impact the views and agriculture in that area. We heard a lot of interest in incorporating rural character and rural feel into the suburban service area. So we identified different tools that could be used to make even suburban residential development incorporate those rural characteristics, and then supporting the local agricultural economy. Housing, this is the current plan does not have a chapter dedicated solely to housing, so this is a new chapter. Of course, most of our homes in the county are single family detached. One thing that we are seeing is that there's aging housing stock. 70% of our housing was built before 2000. So once housing gets to that age that has different needs and maintenance needs and owner expectations and that kind of thing. Over half of our housing is within the suburban service area, particularly that southeastern corner, so east of I-95 and the Atlee and Mechanicsville area. That's where most of our housing is located. We're also seeing, we had some experts come speak to our community participation team, which is the guiding committee in the comprehensive plan, and they talked about some of the challenges associated with rising housing costs. So based on that expert advice, as well as those different characteristics that I mentioned in the previous slide, the community participation team, which is the guiding committee, as well as the board of supervisors, discuss the role the county might have in housing. Of course, the county does not build housing, but it can work with the private sector to address the community's different housing needs. And what the main focus was there was focusing on rehabilitating existing housing stock primarily, and investing in existing neighborhoods. So there was different recommendations in that chapter about promoting residential rehabilitation tax credits, exploring density bonuses for workforce housing. The county does not have a lot of surplus land, but how can that land be used to support affordable workforce housing, and what opportunities are there? Raising awareness of our affordability challenges. You know, home prices have increased significantly over the past few years. So if you haven't been in the housing market, you might necessarily have experienced those rising home prices firsthand. And then supporting continued investment within established neighborhoods. Again, that's one theme that we heard a lot. So again, for the housing chapter, a lot of the recommendations do focus, you know, primarily on existing neighborhoods, existing housing stock. How do we keep that affordable? How do we keep it well maintained and can encourage continued investment there? Active living focuses primarily on pedestrian and bicycle mobility, and that was a new chapter in 2017 and 2018. So based on the lessons learned since that time, there have been some more detail and recommendations developed that really fleshed out the ideas presented in the current plan. There's design guidance for sidewalks and bikeways within residential and commercial development. And this chapter is really geared towards the suburban service area and improving walkability there. Regional trail networks, one new thing since 2018 is that the Fall Line Trail has been funded and the construction will begin soon. How do we connect to that regional trail network and take advantage of that new resource that'll be coming to the community? And since there's limited funding available for pedestrian and bicycle mobility, this plan identifies capital investment focus areas, and those are the parts of the area, primarily the suburban service area, where we're really focused on spending public dollars for pedestrian bicycle infrastructure and addressing that type of mobility as we make roadway improvements. Related to those investment focus areas, a new concept is a pedestrian bicycle spine network. The drafts maps, which are available online, show that spine network, and that's the core roadways and linkages within the community that, if implemented, could connect existing neighborhoods by walking or biking to schools, libraries, parks, and grocery stores. And here's some maps of that recommended spine network, but those are available online, and it's mostly confined to the suburban service area. Again, it's those key linkages that could be made with pedestrian bicycle infrastructure to make that a viable option for transportation, physical activity, and that kind of thing. So that's a quick overview of the topic areas that were covered in round one and round two, as well as the different recommendations. So now I'll move on to round three, which again is transportation, community facilities, and the environment. So transportation is something we all experience and is a part of our everyday life. Even my 2-year-old is really invested in transportation. He loves trucks and yells "go" when there's traffic or we're at a red light. So it's just something we all experience, and it's an important part of the plan that really links to land use and different components of the comprehensive plan. One thing I do want to note, the comprehensive plan, in particular the major thoroughfare plan that is part of the comprehensive plan, is a really high level general document that sets overall direction regarding the investment in our transportation network. The county has different transportation policies and programs that really flesh that out some more. So the comprehensive plan is not going to say add a turn lane at X intersection. It's going to talk about what corridors we should really focus investment on, and then these other components of transportation planning, which are all adopted by the Board of Supervisors, provide more detail and allocate funding to specific projects. So as we were developing the comprehensive plan update, we looked at the existing roadway network, how it functioned, as well as how it could function in 2045 if the county develops in a certain way. So as part of the current roadway network, we looked at what roads are currently approaching capacity or over capacity. So capacity is the number of cars a roadway can handle based on its design. What roadways are dealing with too many cars, more than they can handle, and what roadways do have the ability to handle more cars. From a safety perspective, we also relied on VDOT. They have this tool called potential safety improvements, where they identify road segments and intersections where there's a significant safety issue based on crash data and that kind of thing. So in the county here, VDOT has identified 10 different intersections, primarily in the suburban service area, where there are some safety challenges. So we looked at the data, again, on the current network, what roads are experiencing capacity issues, where the safety issues are, and we developed some maps of those. This is a countywide map, which is kind of hard to see, but you can notice that the reds, yellows, and oranges, those are roadways that are either approaching capacity or 80% capacity or above, or are over capacity. The reds are the roadways that are more over capacity. And those are confined primarily within the suburban service area at this time. So here's a zoom in on the suburban service area. And as you expect, most of these roadways you may already know have some capacity issues. Atlee Station Road, Pole Green Road, and that kind of thing. So not only did we look at existing traffic capacity and safety issues, we looked at potential future conditions based on what that general land use plan shows. So again, that general land use plan shows recommendations on where different types of uses may be appropriate and what parts of the county are suburban versus rural. If that whole area got built out as shown, we looked at what the transportation network could look like in 2045. Based on the analysis, one thing we found is that, again, the suburban service areas where most of the roadway challenges are, that's the most densely populated part of the community where most development occurs. But we start to see a little bit of spread into the rural areas. Some rural roadways might have some capacity constraints. And some roads, even though they have improvements, might still have some capacity constraints as development occurs. So future traffic operations, again, the countywide, it's kind of hard to see, but most of the capacity issues are within that suburban service area in the southern part of the county, but some rural roadways do start experiencing some tension. And again, zooming into the suburban service area, where you can see some of the roadways in red that will be over capacity or maybe over capacity if the SSA builds out, and then yellow are roadways that are approaching capacity. Some of the good news is that projects the county already has funded or is pursuing in partnership with VDOT are located along these corridors. So for example, Pole Green Road shows some capacity issues now and in 2045, but there's a widening project that's already under design and funded and will be completed within that planning horizon. Atlee Station Road is another road where there's already improvements funded, and it's an area that has some capacity issues. So where funding is already being invested aligns with where our challenges are. So hopefully these colors will begin to change over time. There's limited funding available for transportation improvements. So based on the data I just showed you, the existing and future conditions analysis, one new concept in this plan is identifying focus corridors. And those are the corridors or roadway segments in the county where transportation investment should be focused. And again, we're already doing that with some of our transportation funding, and where there should be extra emphasis placed on transportation as land use cases are reviewed along these corridors. So there's over 2,000 miles of roadway in the county, and 27 corridors were identified based on those maps I just showed you, as well as the economic development zones that I mentioned in the economic development section. And this is a map. We also have this map posted online. Most of the focus corridors are in the suburban service area because, as I mentioned, that's where most of the transportation needs are and capacity issues are. There are a few rural roadways that are listed. So, for example, 33 out to Montpelier is a roadway that is listed because of capacity issues, portions of Old Church Road and Market Road. So, again, it's primarily confined to the suburban service area, but we do have some rural roadways that could be the focus or should be the focus of transportation funding and considerations moving forward. And here's a listing, but again, these different roadways and maps are available online under Envision Hanover project resources. Sometimes it's a whole corridor that's listed as a focus corridor. Other times it's a portion or a segment. One thing that's shown in the current plan and will continue moving forward are concept roads, and those are roads that aren't yet built. They're proposed roadways that, if built, could provide transportation relief, help create an interconnected network, and provide access to designated economic development areas. So, as I mentioned, there are concept roads shown in the current major thoroughfare plan. So, based on that analysis, we looked at those proposed roadways with our transportation consultant. And most of the roadways that are shown in the current plan do seem to serve a transportation need. A few were deleted, and then one route was added. Some of the existing roads, the alignments was shifted slightly to reflect existing development that has occurred over the years and that kind of thing. But many of the concept roads are shown in the current plan. This is a listing of the concept roads that are proposed as part of the Envision Hanover planning process. The bold one, Woodside Lane Parallel Road, is the only new one. The other ones are shown on the current plan. Some of their alignments might have shifted a little bit, but in general, they're shown on the plan. And just to give you some reference, Creighton Parkway, that has been in the plan since the 1990s, and only portions of it are built. So these concept roads are really long range plans that we're looking into the future and might take several decades to actually come to fruition. Some of the other ones have actually been built over time. So Richfood Road extension is about to be completed by the private sector. So some of these roadways, while they've been in the plans and been in the books for a while, are starting to come to fruition. Another component of the comprehensive plan are the typical sections. So as I mentioned, we are talking about what types of roads we should focus transportation improvements on, what new roads could be built to improve the network. Typical sections show what those roads could look like going into the future. So it talks about or shows graphically how the road could look if it was ultimately built, with the ultimate number of lanes, sidewalks, shared use paths, and that kind of thing. And the intent of these sections is to make sure that as a county, as growth and development occurs, we have enough space along the roadways to accommodate any future improvements. So for example, it might show that a certain roadway type, such as a major arterial, ultimately may have 4 lanes and a sidewalk and a bike lane. That doesn't mean that that roadway condition will exist even in the horizon of the plan, but we want to make sure there's space there just in case we do have the funding and the need to expand those roadways. The typical sections are in the current plan, and they've been updated to reflect VDOT requirements, pedestrian and bicycle accommodations. So VDOT requires pedestrian and bicycle accommodations in many instances. And based on feedback through this process and previous planning processes, many citizens, particularly in the suburban service area, want pedestrian and bicycle infrastructure. There's some lessons learned as part of recent construction projects that are reflected. So for example, the new sections will show where utilities could be placed based on some challenges that have been experienced as part of recent road widening projects. And there's also different contexts. So the roads ultimately look different in rural areas versus the suburban service areas. So as a result of all this, the recommended right-of-way widths, which is the width of land that is needed for any future roadway improvements, has increased slightly since the current plan to accommodate all those different components of the transportation network. So I'll show you 2 examples just so you can see a little bit more what we're talking about. And the full set of sections is on the Envision Hanover website. So this is a minor arterial. And you can see in the suburban service area, these roadways may ultimately have 4 lanes, 2 lanes in each direction. And on one side, there's a shared use path to accommodate pedestrians and cyclists. And there's a certain amount of spacing you need between the path and the road based on VDOT requirements. And the other side, there's sidewalk improvements. As I mentioned, on the far right side, there's also accommodations for utility relocation, you know, power, water, sewer. How do you get out of the roadway as the roadway widens? So this is what a urban section looks like. This particular roadway type, the recommended right-of-way width will increase from 100 feet in the current plan to 120, so 10 feet on either side of the roadway. But the main takeaway here is, again, incorporating pedestrian and bicycle infrastructure as well as VDOT requirements into the section. Rural roadways in the draft sections won't have sidewalks or shared use paths. They will have a wide shoulder, so you can see 8-foot paved shoulder on the outside on both sides of the roadway, which could be used for pedestrians or cyclists or disabled vehicles, as well as for safety purposes. To accommodate all this, there is a wider right-of-way width. This particular type of roadway, the right-of-way width increases from 100 feet to 127 feet. One reason the rural roadways are slightly wider is because they typically have ditch section. You can actually get a more compact roadway when you have curb and gutter in the urban areas, but the rural areas will have open ditches, so those actually require a little bit more space than the curb and gutter. So this, again, is just an example of some of the things that are being thought about as we look into the future design of roadways. And the full set of these sections, if you want to take a deeper dive, are online. In addition to all those maps and typical sections, there are some recommendations that are listed as implementation strategies in the draft text. If you want to check those out, some of the highlights include interconnectivity, promoting an interconnected road network within new development, both for motorists as well as for pedestrians and cyclists. Completing alignment studies for those concept roads. So as I mentioned, we have those proposed roadways, but a lot of them don't have a lot of detail regarding the exact alignment. So completing alignment studies so we know exactly where those roadways will go in the future. And then conducting a study of a possible I-95 interchange north of Ashland. That has actually been in the comprehensive plan since the 1970s. It hasn't moved forward. So some more detailed planning is really needed to see how that particular interchange could be designed, how it could function, and how it could improve the overall transportation network. So moving on to environment and resiliency. Environment has been an important component of the plan for several versions of the plan. Resiliency, this is the first time it's been specifically focused on in the comprehensive plan. The text for the environmental chapter, which is online, includes an inventory of our environmental resources, land, water, air, and our natural heritage resources. It also provides an overview of environmental policies. Some of these are requirements in state code that we highlight these different policies and programs. And there's already a lot being done by the county and some of its partners to address environmental issues, particularly water quality. So all those are outlined in the draft plan and the draft text. Some of the main objectives that are incorporated into the draft text and their specific strategies are fleshed out with each of these objectives. Protect and improve water quality. As I mentioned, there's already a lot of different programs related to water quality. How do we continue those? Protecting our tidal rivers and streams. This is one thing that's required in state code. We actually have some tidal rivers and streams which are considered coastal by the state. How do we protect those resources? How do we work collaboratively as a county with public and private entities to protect natural habitats, and protection of these natural resources can help improve air and water quality? And how do we minimize light pollution? Some of the key strategies that are related to those objectives are more within the draft text, but I just wanted to highlight a few of them. Related to water quality, continue to require the protection of Chesapeake Bay resource protection areas as new development occurs. And that just involves protecting buffers along our rivers, streams, and woodlands in their natural state. Also plan a community cleanup event. how can the county partner with citizens to get them involved to make sure that our water quality and our overall environmental quality are maintained and we maintain our scenic community. In regards to natural habitat, one thing we heard a lot of during the public engagement process is people are really interested in making sure that trees are preserved as development occurs, mature trees. So there is there are some strategies related to encouraging the protection of healthy mature trees within new development as part of capital projects. There's also a related strategy that really encourages the use of native species. We heard that was of interest to a lot of our citizens as well, using species that are native to the area and really reflect our environmental resources and character. Encourage the preservation of wildlife corridors within larger scale development, and support the work of conservation organizations in acquiring conservation easements to purchasing property. There's a lot of state agencies and nonprofits that are already working voluntarily with landowners to help them and facilitate the long-term protection of their land. How can the county support those organizations as well? Again, the full list of recommended strategies are in the draft text under that project resources page. Resiliency, again, that's a new component of this chapter. Resiliency involves reducing the vulnerability of the county and its citizens to natural and man-made disasters where possible to improve residents' safety and quality of life. There's 4 different components of the draft text related to resiliency: hazard mitigation, renewable energy, efficient resource management, and historic and culturally sensitive communities. I'll go through these recommendations a little bit. Hazard mitigation, that's how the county can work with the private sector to help protect residents and businesses from potential hazards. Hanover County participates in regional hazard mitigation planning. So there's a regional hazard mitigation plan that's been adopted by the county and other counties in the region. So how can we help implement that plan and the recommendations within it? Efficient resource management, how do we efficiently manage and use energy, water, and solid waste? Encourage the implementation of environmentally sustainable certification programs such as LEED and Earthcraft. And this is just a voluntary type strategy where we encourage different stakeholders to consider those certification projects as they develop projects. Investigate the feasibility of designing public facilities to LEED standards. Again, that's one of those environmental certification programs. And consider designing public facilities to minimize the use of potable water for irrigation. So, using native plants or that kind of thing to minimize how much water we're using to water our plants versus within the facilities themselves. And renewable energy, this really deals with how the county addresses solar energy in particular. There is a policy that's being developed regarding solar energy, where those types of facilities should be located, how they should be designed, and how they should be constructed to best protect the community, both from an aesthetic standpoint and environmental standpoint. So the recommendations in the draft resiliency component of the plan align with that policy. And that's currently under development. We'll go to the Planning Commission July 20th. And also, one thing we actually heard at some of the public events, as I mentioned, we went to Tomato Festival and Ashland Train Day. There was a lot of interest there that there be more opportunities for charging stations for cars and that kind of thing. That hasn't one thing we heard a lot previously, but again, as there's more demand for those types of electric cars and that kind of thing, we heard at public events that people want to have access to those amenities. And that would not be something the county would provide, but how do we partner with the private sector to accommodate that interest? And then historic and culturally sensitive communities. One component of resiliency is collaboration and working with different sectors of the county and different communities within the county. So how do we consider the impacts of county policies on communities that may have had historic issues such as Brown Grove, Pleasant Grove Road, and Cobbs Road? And there's different strategies related to getting those communities involved in the planning process and making sure that county policies and programs minimize any negative impacts on those particular communities. So that's an overview of environment and resiliency, and this is the final component of the plan and what I'll give an overview on, and that's community facilities. The community facilities chapter addresses physical improvements to different parts of county government. So what physical improvements are needed to support the population in regards to public utilities, fire and EMS, parks and recreation, libraries, public schools, general government administration, and telecommunications and broadband infrastructure. The comprehensive plan is very high level and provides high level direction regarding the types of facilities and improvements that may be needed to support the population now through 2045. Many of these topic areas have more specific master plans that get into more detail as to what improvements may be needed. So the comp plan is overall direction, and then more details developed by each department through their master plans that are ultimately adopted by the Board of Supervisors as well. A lot of the update process with this chapter involved updating the text and strategies to reflect existing facilities built since 2018, population forecast through 2045. One thing I want to note is the current plan, 2018 plan, projected or forecast population growth of 1.5% per year. Based on current trends and what we've actually been seeing over the past 5 years, the population forecast has been reduced. We think the county may only grow 1% per year, so that influences the types of facilities that we'll need. The updated text reflects recommendations made in facility studies, and again, those master plans that I mentioned that each department takes. And there's also a recommendation on additional planning work that needs to be done, such as our economic development strategic plan, updating the parks and recreation plan, which is last updated in 2010, and is currently in the process of being updated, and updating the water and wastewater facilities master plan to reflect any changes in the general land use plan. There are some high-level maps, again, that show the general location of public facilities, such as where public utilities existing infrastructure is, where proposed infrastructure is, where existing schools are, and where existing parks are. Some of the changes since the current plan is, again, to reflect facilities built or under construction since 2018. So, for example, the draft maps show the new fire station that's being built next in Laurel Meadow along Lee Davis Road. Reflecting public utilities, they updated their master plan in 2021, reflecting any changes they had there. And then the proposed schools complex along 360 East near Pole Green and Williamsville roads, showing that on the map as well. So that is an overview of all the topic areas. Again, the comprehensive plan is comprehensive and addresses a ton of topics. So that was a high level overview in about 45 minutes, but more detail is online. If you go to, again, envisionhanover.com, there's a couple tabs on the top. The draft documents are under project resources, and the full texts and maps are there. This is the first event in the round 3 topical focus area events, and these events will be held now through early next week. So we have some in-person meetings that begin tonight and are held Tuesday, Thursday, and then next Monday. Again, we had this webinar, of course, and then we have a stop and chat, which is more office hours and formal time for you to talk with the project team next week at Atlee Library. So we'll work on these events and have these events throughout the county this week and next week. And we're to take all the feedback like we did for the previous rounds, analyze it, have a summary memo, and make any changes that we think reflect the community's feedback with the input from the Planning Commission and the Board of Supervisors. The Planning Commission and Board of Supervisors will have a joint workshop on July 26th, where they'll hear what we heard during the round 3 engagement and discuss the plan overall and any changes they would like made. The Planning Commission is scheduled to have its public hearing on August 10th, so a month from today. They'll have their public hearing where the public will have an opportunity to provide additional feedback on the draft documents, and then depending on what the Planning Commission recommendation is and how much time they need to reflect citizen feedback, the Board of Supervisors is scheduled to hold its public hearing about 2 months from now in September. So here are the different ways that you all can provide feedback. At the meetings itself, you can discuss ideas with the project team, provide written comments, drop off comments. There's a comment box on the Envision Hanover website, email comments to Envision Hanover at hanovercounty.gov, or attend one of the public hearings. As I mentioned, all the documents are online. We'll have print copies of all the documents at the in-person meetings as well. So again, envisionhanover.com is the best place for update information. You can sign up for an email list there, and you can also follow the social media pages on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter to learn about upcoming events and that kind of thing. So we have about 15 minutes. That's all the information I had. We have about 15 minutes to answer any questions that you all have. I'd be happy to open the floor to that. So you just have to, unmute yourself and share your question. If you think of something later, again, you can shoot us an email at envisionhanover@hanovercounty.gov, or give us a call at 365-6171. So again, I'll open it up to any questions that participants might have. One thing I do want to mention as well is this webinar will be posted online on the county's YouTube page. So if there's someone that that couldn't attend or can't attend one of the in-person meetings, they can watch it. We'll hope to have this up today or tomorrow. And the previous webinars are also on there as well. All right, so it doesn't look like we have any questions at this time, but again, feel free to shoot us an email or give us a call if you all think of any comments or need any clarification, and please check out those detailed documents on the Envision Hanover website. So thanks again, everyone, for participating, and we look forward to seeing you at future meetings and events as well.